It all started on a day so ordinary, Michelle Carter could barely remember what she ate for breakfast. The Georgia sun poured through the courthouse windows, dust motes swirling in the hard white light. But Michelle couldn't feel its warmth. Her hands were ice cold, wrists trembling just above the handcuffs, though she tried to hold herself steady for the bailiff's sake, and for the dozens of eyes watching, hungry for a spectacle. Her uniform felt too tight across her shoulders, the polyester scratching, and what hurt most was the empty space at her side where Ranger, her K9 partner, always walked. The leash hook on her belt was still there, but it hung useless, cold metal against her hip. 3 months ago, she'd been one of the most respected officers in the city, a rising star, the go-to problem solver, the woman who never gave up on a case or a person. Now she was a pariah. The word guilty echoed in her ears, pounding in rhythm with her heart. She wasn't guilty, but evidence said otherwise. Plastic baggies stuffed in her glove box, fingerprints that matched, a mysterious bank deposit she never made, her signature scrawled across a transfer sheet she'd never seen. Lies wrapped in more lies, so tight even her own lawyer's voice grew strained and doubtful. She scanned the courtroom. Some faces she knew, former colleagues who couldn't meet her gaze, others who smirked as if justice had finally been served. Her supervisor, Captain Ray Harding, sat in the front row, face perfectly blank. But Michelle felt a cold chill every time she glanced his way. He hadn't visited her once since the investigation began. Not even when she lost her badge. Not even when the headlines called her a disgrace. Her friends from the force, gone silent. She thought of all the times she'd covered for them, risked her own reputation for the team. But in this moment, loyalty seemed like a cruel joke. Then there was Ranger, her partner of 4 years, a big, handsome German shepherd with a white patch under his chin and a tail that wagged like a metronome. He'd saved her life twice, tracked missing children through swamp and brush, disarmed a gunman with a single bark. In the end, he was the only one who still believed in her. When they took him from her, Michelle felt something in her chest snap, a leash that had kept her anchored through every storm. The judge, an old woman with a reputation for mercy, seemed to sense this. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Officer Carter, before you are remanded into custody, I will grant you 3 minutes to say goodbye to your K9 partner. Make them count." Michelle almost broke down right there, but she squared her jaw and nodded. 2 bailiffs led her down a side corridor, past the familiar mugshots and fingerprint desks, and into a small, windowless room. The door opened, and there he was, Ranger, ears up, tail thumping, eyes locked on hers. He lunged forward, the leash stretching taut between him and the handler. "Easy, buddy," Michelle whispered, crouching as best she could with her hands cuffed. Ranger whined and shoved his nose under her hands, licking her knuckles, pushing so hard she thought he'd knock her over. "I'm so sorry, Ranger," she said, voice cracking as she pressed her forehead to his. "I let you down, didn't I? I tried to protect everyone, but I didn't see it coming. You deserved better. I'll never forgive myself for getting us into this mess." Ranger whined again, pawing at her knee, desperate to comfort her. Michelle closed her eyes and let the sound fill her, trying to memorize the texture of his fur, the warmth of his breath, the rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. She couldn't cry. Not now. Not with the bailiff standing in the doorway, watching every move. Suddenly, Ranger tensed. His body stiffened, nose twitching as he sniffed around her uniform, especially the jacket she'd worn on the day of her arrest. Michelle felt a prickle of confusion, then dread. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, But there was no time for answers. The handler tugged the leash. "Time's up," he said, a little softer than before. Michelle hugged Ranger one last time, breathing in the familiar scent. Soap, leather, a hint of cedar from his favorite bed. "Be good," she said, forcing a smile. "Find the truth if you can. I know you'll try." As she was led away, Michelle glanced over her shoulder and saw Ranger still staring at her, tail slowly sinking, eyes full of questions. Back in the holding cell, she replayed every second. His sudden alertness, the way he sniffed her uniform, the look in his eyes. Was there something she'd missed? Was Ranger trying to tell her something? But no one would listen. In the official record, she was now inmate Carter, a cop turned criminal. Yet a tiny spark of hope remained, burning deep in her chest. Hope that Ranger's loyalty would outlast her disgrace. Outside, thunder rumbled over the courthouse, as if the world itself was restless. Inside, Michelle Carter sat on her narrow cot, alone, trying to remember what justice used to feel like. Somewhere in the building, her K-9 partner paced and whined, refusing to settle. Neither of them knew it, but the real fight for her name, and for the truth, had only just begun. The courthouse air was sharp with anticipation, every bench packed, the low hum of whispers cut by the bailiff's call to order. Michelle Carter stood behind the defense table, wrists still cuffed, heart pounding loud enough that she wondered if the whole room could hear. The sentencing hearing was supposed to be a formality, a final nail in her professional coffin. Her lawyer, thin and haggard, muttered last-minute reassurances that sounded empty even to him. Captain Ray Harding sat across the aisle, arms folded, gaze as cold and unmoving as a tombstone. At the back of the courtroom, Ranger stood with his new handler, Officer Sarah Mitchell. He was supposed to be calm, obedient, proof that the department's K-9 program could continue without Michelle. But the German shepherd was agitated, ears pricked, eyes searching the crowd, the fur along his spine rippling with tension. Michelle couldn't look away. She mouthed, "It's okay, boy." But Ranger only pressed forward, straining against Sarah's grip. The judge entered. The court rose. "Be seated." Her voice was steady, almost tired. "Miss Carter, do you have anything to say before I deliver my decision?" Michelle's mind raced with everything she wanted to scream. About the setup, the evidence that didn't add up, the colleagues who'd turned their backs, the way truth felt slippery and far away. Instead, she said, "I have nothing left to say, but I'm innocent." The judge nodded, her eyes lingering a second longer than necessary. Then she cleared her throat. "Let the record show." She never finished. A sudden commotion drew every gaze to the back of the room. Ranger, out of nowhere, yanked his leash from Sarah's hand and bolted down the aisle. The room gasped. Bailiffs lunged, but Ranger was too fast. He ran straight for Michelle, skidding to a halt at her feet. In that split second, everything else faded. There was only the dog and his partner, reunited against the world. Ranger whined, pressing his nose to her uniform jacket. Then, unexpectedly, he began pawing frantically at the lining, biting and tugging as if desperate to rip it open. "What is he doing?" someone muttered. "Get him under control," barked Captain Harding, but the bailiffs hesitated. Even in chaos, there was a reverence for a K-9's instincts. Michelle stood frozen as Ranger's teeth found the inner seam of her jacket and tugged. There was a tiny pop. Then something fell to the floor. A small black disc, no bigger than a quarter, rolled out from under the hem. The room fell silent. The judge leaned forward. "What is that?" Michelle's lawyer scooped it up, eyes wide. "Your Honor, I believe this is a recording device." He turned it over in his hands. There's an evidence tag, but this isn't standard issue. Who checked Officer Carter's uniform before her trial? The prosecutor paled. That wasn't our team. It must have been... He trailed off, glancing toward the defense. The judge motioned the bailiff over. Bring that here, now. The device was handed over, and a tech expert summoned from the hallway. Within minutes, the courtroom lights dimmed, and the faint sound of static crackled through the speakers. A voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. Captain Ray Harding. Make sure you tag Carter's jacket. Slip it in the lining. She'll never know. Just like we did with the gloves. You understand me? Another male voice. Yes, sir. What about the files? Harding again, cold and impatient. Already handled. If she goes down, that's the end of it. No loose ends. A stunned hush filled the room. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the judge's gavel banged down. Stop the sentencing. I am ordering an immediate investigation. Officer Carter will remain in custody, but this case is now under formal review. Captain Harding, you will be remanded for questioning by Internal Affairs. Harding leapt to his feet, voice trembling with anger. This is a mistake. That audio is doctored. I want my attorney. But the bailiffs closed in, hands on his arms, leading him from the room. Harding's glare found Michelle, cold and poisonous, promising that this was not over. Michelle could barely stand. Ranger pressed against her, warm and solid, tail thumping as if he knew victory when he saw it. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing on the feel of his fur, the gentle pressure of his weight. The judge looked at Michelle, her tone shifting from authority to empathy. You will remain in custody for your safety, Miss Carter, but the charges are suspended pending further investigation. I am appointing a special review board, effective immediately. Officer Mitchell, please secure the K-9 unit and coordinate with Internal Affairs. Sarah Mitchell, shaken and pale, knelt by Ranger. He let her leash him again, but kept glancing at Michelle, refusing to leave her side until ordered. Sarah hesitated, then reached out, awkward but genuine. He saved you, she whispered. Don't worry, I'll take care of him, and I'll watch my back. As Michelle was led from the courtroom, she passed the benches packed with officers, some ashamed, some furious, a few quietly cheering. Her lawyer squeezed her arm, his voice a ragged whisper. You're not done. Not yet. That dog just gave you a second chance. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain battered the courthouse steps, thunder echoing off the stone walls. Inside the holding cell, Michelle stared at the blank ceiling, heart pounding with a mix of hope and terror. Ranger had found the first crack in the wall of lies, but the battle was just beginning. Somewhere, in a darkened office, others listened to the court audio, panic rising in their voices. Phones buzzed with warnings. Plans were changing. But for the first time in months, Michelle Carter slept with a thin thread of hope wrapped around her heart, trusting in loyalty, the kind that only comes from someone who'd risk everything for you, even if they couldn't say a word. The morning after the courtroom bombshell, the police station was a hive of rumors and panic. Overnight, word of the secret recording had spread beyond the courthouse, weaving through every department like smoke, hard to see, impossible to ignore. Some officers wore shock openly on their faces. Others hurried through the halls, avoiding eye contact and lowering their voices. In break rooms and at the back steps, the same questions echoed. Was Michelle Carter really innocent? Who else was involved? If Captain Harding could fall, who was safe? Michelle Carter, meanwhile, sat in a secure interview room, her orange jumpsuit traded for plain clothes at the judge's request. She wasn't free, far from it, But for the first time in months, the walls around her felt less like a cell and more like a challenge she might actually break through. The reviewing judge, cautious but fair, explained the situation in a low, measured voice. The charges against you are suspended pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs will reopen your case, but you're still under supervision, for your safety and ours. Michelle nodded, barely trusting herself to hope. To avoid influence or retaliation, the judge ordered Michelle to be temporarily released into the care of Officer Sarah Mitchell, someone clean, trusted, and outside the inner circle Harding had corrupted. Sarah was known for her integrity, but also her skepticism. She didn't believe in taking anyone's word for granted, especially not a disgraced cop. Michelle was to stay in Sarah's home, under discreet watch, until further notice. She wasn't allowed back at the station or to contact former colleagues, not even to check on her own case. Sarah wasn't thrilled about the arrangement. Her apartment was small, cluttered with plants and old case files. She'd expected quiet nights and weekends off, not the city's most controversial officer crashing on her couch, guarded by a dog with trust issues. But Ranger, for his part, seemed restless, always glancing between the door and Michelle, as if waiting for a threat only he could sense. On their first night, Michelle tried to thank Sarah. "You don't have to trust me," she said quietly, "but I'm grateful you took me in. I know it's a risk." Sarah shrugged, arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "I don't trust anyone right now. But that dog—" She nodded at Ranger, curled up by Michelle's feet. "He's the only reason I agreed. K9S don't lie." It wasn't long before the investigation began to turn up new threads. The audio evidence had cracked open the surface, but beneath it, something more sinister churned. Internal Affairs moved quickly, bringing Captain Harding in for questioning. Under pressure, Harding played the innocent, his voice calm, eyes steady, claiming he'd been framed. But phone records didn't lie. There were late-night calls to a city councilman with a reputation for backroom deals. Deleted emails surfaced, with attachments labeled Evidence 2, Confidential, and Carter Payoff. Every stone unturned seemed to reveal another, darker secret. The judge, impatient for results, assigned Michelle a temporary advocate, a lawyer she barely knew, but who seemed eager for a fight. Together, they pored over the case files. Michelle's arrest, they discovered, had been prompted by an anonymous tip from a blocked number. Evidence had been logged with unfamiliar initials. The routine uniform check before her trial, the one that led to the planted recording device, had been performed by an officer Michelle had never met, someone hired on Harding's personal recommendation. One after another, pieces started to connect. Ranger was the real hero. He couldn't speak, but his instincts were razor-sharp. He wouldn't settle at night until he'd checked every window and door. During the day, he followed Michelle from room to room, head up, muscles tense, tail flicking at every strange sound. Sarah watched him, and for the first time since taking the case, she began to wonder if maybe Michelle really was set up. On the third day, Ranger began fixating on something strange. Each time Sarah left the apartment, he sat by her feet and whined until she picked up her old gear bag, the one she'd rescued from Michelle's locker when she was suspended. There was nothing unusual about the bag, at least on the surface. But Ranger sniffed and pawed at it relentlessly, nose pressed to the lining, ears alert. Michelle watched, puzzled. "What is it, buddy? There's nothing in there." But Ranger wouldn't give up. That night, after Sarah returned from a late shift, she finally relented. "Let's see what's bothering you." With Michelle's help, she dumped out the bag on the kitchen table. Flashlight, backup badge, notebook, spare radio battery. Nothing unusual. But Ranger's nose went to the bottom, pressing along the seams, then to the side pocket, pawing furiously. Michelle reached inside, feeling for anything hidden, and her fingers found a loose thread. She tugged. The seam opened, just a fraction. Tucked inside was a thin manila envelope, sealed with red tape. Michelle's heart leapt. "This wasn't here before." She slid it out, careful not to tear it. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance shots of Harding and the city councilman, cash changing hands in a parking lot behind a bar Michelle recognized. There were copies of text messages, bank slips, a list of names, other officers, a judge, even a local reporter, all tied to a series of bribes and cover-ups. Sarah stared, breathless. This is big. We have to go to internal affairs. This is more than just you, Michelle." Michelle shook her head, thinking hard. "If we walk in with this, they'll know someone tipped us off. What if we wait, dig a little deeper, find out who else is involved? If we play this wrong, someone could get hurt, or the evidence could disappear." Sarah hesitated, torn between the safety of the rules and the danger of the truth. Then Ranger let out a low, steady whine, a sound that meant, in all the years Michelle had worked with him, "We're running out of time." Finally, Sarah nodded, her decision made. "All right, we do this together. But we have to be careful. No one, not even the people we trust, can know until we're sure." The network was larger than either of them had imagined. In the shadows, Harding's allies were already moving, sensing the walls closing in. But now Michelle, Sarah, and Ranger had the first real leverage they'd seen since the nightmare began. Outside, rain streaked the city windows, blurring the world into streaks of gray and gold. Inside, 3 unlikely allies prepared to pull at a web of corruption that threatened to unravel the whole department. And for the first time, Michelle Carter felt something she hadn't felt in months, the faint but unmistakable rush of hope. Sarah Mitchell stood in her own living room, clutching the envelope of evidence with both hands, as if afraid it might turn to dust if she let go. The thin manila packet felt heavier than a brick. Michelle sat at the small kitchen table, anxiety etched deep into her face, watching Sarah and waiting. Ranger, ever alert, paced between them, ears flicking back and forth as if he understood the gravity of what had just been discovered. The photos, the text messages, the payoff slips. They weren't just damning, they were dangerous. They implicated more than just Captain Harding and the city councilman. There were other names, names of people still on the force, people Sarah knew and even liked. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the files again. "How long do you think they've been doing this?" she asked, not expecting an answer. Michelle exhaled, the weight of old betrayals sharpening every word. "Long enough to cover their tracks, and smart enough to bury anyone who gets too close." She paused, glancing at the clock. "We have to be careful. They know I'm not convicted anymore. If they suspect we have this—" She tapped the envelope, voice trailing off. Sarah paced to the window and peered through the blinds. The city was quiet, streetlights glowing in the mist, but in her gut she sensed movement, like sharks circling. If we report this, we might end up targets. But if we sit on it, someone else could get hurt. What do we do? Ranger broke the tense silence with a sharp bark. He padded over to the corner of the room and pawed at Michelle's old duffel bag again. Sarah gave a weary laugh. He's relentless. But when she looked into Ranger's eyes, she didn't see just a dog. She saw a partner, determined and full of conviction, maybe more certain than either of the humans in the room. With a sigh, Sarah crossed to the bag and opened it, searching for anything they'd missed. Ranger nosed aside a crumpled sweatshirt and began scratching at the base of the bag. Hidden in the lining, taped against the stiff canvas, was a second envelope, this one containing a set of keys and a USB drive. Michelle frowned. "That's not mine." She turned the USB over in her hands. There were no markings, just a faint scratch along one edge. Sarah found an old laptop, powered it up, and plugged in the drive, her breath shallow. The screen flickered, then displayed a folder named Insurance. Inside were dozens of files, scanned documents, audio recordings, and a spreadsheet tracking deposits and withdrawals from a variety of local accounts, all traced to names from the bribery list. Michelle leaned over, eyes wide. "This is a full accounting. It's everything. The money, the deals, the dates, the connections." She scrolled to a recording marked Locker 7. The audio played out. Harding's voice unmistakable, talking to someone Michelle recognized as Detective Laramie. "Don't worry about Carter. She'll be out of the picture soon. Just make sure the evidence disappears from Locker 7. If she starts digging, we handle it." The voices sounded calm, almost bored, as if ruining a career was just another chore. Sarah's hands shook as she closed the file. "I put my trust in Laramie. We worked together for years." She looked at Michelle, her voice thin. "How do you work in a place where you don't know who to trust?" Michelle's answer was blunt. "You trust your instincts, or you trust someone who has nothing left to lose." Her gaze fell to Ranger, who wagged his tail slowly, sensing the shift in tension. It was Ranger who gave them the next clue. Later that night, Sarah was locking up for the evening when she saw Ranger staring at the door to her guest room. The dog wouldn't budge. When she let him in, he circled the space, then planted himself in front of an old police locker, one Sarah had rescued from the station's storage when she first moved in, now used to keep her spare gear and files. Ranger whined, scratched at the door, then sat down, gaze fixed. Sarah looked at Michelle, her own heartbeat suddenly in her throat. "I almost forgot I had this," she murmured. "But why is he—" Michelle knelt and ran her hands over the locker's edges. At the base, her fingers caught on a loose panel. With a bit of prying, she slid it open, revealing a thin metal compartment. Inside were more documents: signed orders, fake search warrants, an envelope of cash, and a burner phone. Sarah drew back, shaken. All these years, sitting right in my house. They stared at the stash, realization dawning. "This was Harding's insurance policy," Michelle said, almost awed. "He must have hidden it here before the walls closed in. Maybe he planned to use you as a scapegoat if he ever needed to run." Sarah sat hard on the bed, face pale. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Sarah found her voice. "I'm in this now, aren't I? If I turn this in, it's my word against half the department. But if I stay quiet, I'm as bad as they are." Michelle nodded, quietly resolute. "If you want out, I'll understand. But if you help me, you have to be ready for a fight." Ranger walked over and nudged Sarah's hand, his steady presence grounding her. She stroked his fur, feeling the strength of his faith, a faith she realized she'd lost somewhere along the way. "I'm scared, but I won't run," Sarah said at last, her voice gaining steel. "We do this right, or not at all. I'll report what we found, first thing tomorrow, and I'll make sure Ranger stays with you. If anyone tries to separate you again, they'll have to go through me." That night, as thunder rumbled beyond the city, Michelle and Sarah sat side by side, poring over the files, planning their next move. Ranger slept at their feet, content at last, his instincts having led them another step closer to justice. The stakes had never been higher, But for the first time, neither woman felt alone. Outside, headlights passed, shadows flickered, and somewhere, those responsible for the corruption grew restless, sensing the tide was turning. The reluctant ally had chosen her side, and she wasn't backing down. Sarah Mitchell had always believed that if you did the right thing, the system would protect you. That belief had taken a beating in the last 48 hours. Now, sitting at her kitchen table at 3 in the morning, Sarah wondered if she'd ever really understood how deep the rot went. Next to her, Michelle Carter was mapping out their findings with the focus of a detective on her last chance. Between them, the kitchen was littered with evidence: printouts, USB drives, envelopes stuffed with cash, and the 2 old police lockers that had become treasure chests of dirty secrets. Ranger slept at their feet, occasionally twitching in his dreams, but every time the refrigerator hummed or the pipes rattled, he raised his head and scanned the darkened room. The dog's nerves were infectious. Sarah realized she was flinching at every sound, too. "We can't sit on this evidence any longer," Michelle said, her voice hushed but urgent. "Whoever's behind this, they'll move as soon as they realize Harding is down. The whole network could scatter, or worse, go after us directly." Sarah nodded, pulling her knees to her chest. "What if we go to internal affairs, and they're in on it too? Some of these names, they've been there for decades. It's not just Harding." Michelle stared at the ceiling, thinking. "We need backup, but not from inside the department. There are a handful of people I still trust. Old friends, rookies, people who never got close to Harding's circle." She looked at Sarah, measuring her next words. "Would you help me build a team? Off the record, just for now." Sarah hesitated for less than a second. "Of course, we have to." By noon the next day, they'd reached out to 3 trusted officers: Luis Cortez, an honest detective; Janice Morrow, a forensics specialist; and Owen Tran, a patrol sergeant with a reputation for not looking the other way. Each one listened in silence to Michelle's coded messages, then agreed to meet at a nearby diner. No uniforms, no notes. Just wary allies sharing pie and secrets in a crowded booth. Luis leaned in, voice low. "I've been waiting for something like this. For years. You have evidence?" Michelle slid him a copy of the files. "We have enough to blow this wide open, but if we're not careful, someone will get to us first." Owen checked the street through the window, tension etched into his brow. "You know they're watching you, right? 2 guys in an unmarked car been parked 3 blocks down since you left Sarah's apartment." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Are you sure?" Owen nodded. "They're not ours, and that's not all. Someone tried to break into Janice's lab last night, smashed the back door, set off the alarm, but nothing was stolen, just a warning." The group fell silent. The stakes had jumped overnight. Janice whispered, "They know we're moving against them. We have to assume they're listening to every call, tracking every step." Michelle pushed her plate away, suddenly nauseous. "We're out of time. We need to get the physical evidence to a secure location, someplace only we know. After that, we go to the press, not just internal affairs. If the story is public, they can't silence us all." They agreed on a plan. Janice would smuggle the USB drives and documents out in her bag. Luis would tail the watchers and try to ID them. And Sarah and Michelle would head back to her apartment to collect everything else. Owen would act as backup, circling the block to watch for trouble. On the drive home, Michelle's phone buzzed with a restricted call. She let it go to voicemail, then played it back on speaker. A distorted voice, cold and anonymous. "You're making a mistake. Stop now, and this all goes away. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." There was a pause, then the sound of heavy breathing and a click as the call ended. Sarah shivered. They're not bluffing. By late afternoon, the sense of unease had grown. Michelle and Sarah packed up the last of the evidence into a locked metal box and started down to the car, Ranger leading the way. They barely made it to the lobby when Sarah froze. Her car, which she always parked right outside the apartment, had its windows smashed and tires slashed. Someone had left a note on the windshield. "This is your only warning." Michelle scanned the street. "We're being herded. We can't go back upstairs." Her mind raced through their options, the city map she knew by heart. There's an old safe house near the edge of town. Used to be a backup spot for witness protection. Nobody outside the old task force knows about it. We go there, regroup, and call for outside help. Just then, Ranger's body stiffened. He let out a low, dangerous growl, the sound rising from deep in his chest. Michelle caught it instantly. Danger, close and closing in. "Get down," she hissed, pushing Sarah behind a pillar just as two masked men burst from a side alley, sprinting toward them. One of them carried a crowbar, the other a stun gun. Before the attackers could reach them, Ranger lunged, all muscle and fury, knocking the first man flat. The second swung the crowbar wildly. Michelle dodged, grabbing Sarah's arm and yanking her away. Ranger's jaws clamped on the man's wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon, then spun to face the other. The second attacker hesitated, then bolted, disappearing into the maze of alleyways. Michelle scooped up the evidence box and hustled Sarah toward the side entrance. Sirens wailed in the distance. Owen had already called for backup, thank God. They sprinted to the street, Ranger at their heels, and flagged down Owen's cruiser just as it screeched to a stop. "Get in!" Owen yelled. They piled into the back seat, hearts pounding, the metal box clutched between them. Ranger panted heavily, tongue lolling, but his eyes never left the street as Owen sped off, weaving through traffic, taking side roads and sharp corners until the city faded into open country. It was twilight by the time they reached the safe house, a low, nondescript building surrounded by scrub pine and tall fences. As the door closed behind them, Michelle sagged against the wall, relief and fear colliding in her chest. They'd survived, barely, but now they were out of places to run. The conspirators knew they were coming. The only hope left was to hold the line, protect the evidence, and pray that someone would answer their call for help before it was too late. Ranger lay down by the door, head up, eyes sharp. He'd saved them again, but the night was far from over. The safe house wasn't much to look at, a squat building hidden at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by tangled pine trees and an 8-foot fence. Sarah had always imagined witness protection spots as high-tech fortresses, but this was just an old house with thick walls and a basement full of dust. Still, to Michelle and her team, it was a last sanctuary. The world outside felt impossibly far away. As night fell, Michelle, Sarah, Owen, Janice, and Ranger moved quickly. They set up what they could: security cameras, trip alarms on the doors, and makeshift barricades from heavy furniture. Luis texted that he was on his way with more evidence, but his last message, "Traffic's heavy, might be late. Watch your 6, left them uneasy. Inside, the safe house felt thick with tension. Owen scanned the perimeter, rifle in hand. Janice cataloged the evidence, double-checking every photo, flash drive, and cash slip. Sarah kept close to Michelle, her face pale but determined. "If they come," she said, "they're coming for the evidence, not us." Michelle glanced at the locked steel case on the table. "I hope so. But they won't leave witnesses if they don't have to." She checked her old service pistol. She wasn't supposed to have it, technically, but rules seemed to matter less with every hour. Her real comfort was Ranger, who paced restlessly by the doors, nose twitching, hackles up. Outside, the wind picked up, sending pine needles scraping across the siding. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Michelle's phone, set to silent, buzzed with a new message. This time, a blocked number. Too late to back out. Give us what we want, and you walk away. No one replied. They just waited, and hoped Luis would get through. It started a little after midnight. Sarah noticed the security camera's feed flicker. Just a blip, then darkness. Janice was the first to spot shadows moving beyond the fence. Movement outside, southeast corner, she whispered, ducking low. Owen peered through the blinds, just in time to see the shape of a man scaling the fence, another slipping around back. Michelle moved fast. "Everybody, positions!" she barked. "Keep low. Janice, stay with the evidence. Sarah, help Owen cover the back. Ranger, with me." She took her place by the front door, pressing herself flat against the wall, heart slamming in her chest. Sarah joined Owen by the kitchen, gun drawn, but hands shaking. "I've never fired at a person," she whispered. Owen's jaw tightened. "Just aim for the ground if you have to. Don't let them get inside." Ranger, nose to the crack beneath the door, stiffened, then barked, low and fierce. Michelle heard glass break in the back, the screech of a crowbar on metal. Two men tried to force the rear window, but Owen fired a warning shot. Wood splintered, and they fell back, cursing. Ranger bolted for the back, Michelle on his heels. The next minutes were chaos. A muffled bang, the crash of something heavy in the basement. Sarah shouting for help as a masked man kicked in the kitchen door. Anger lunged, teeth flashing, and took the man down, pinning him to the ground until Michelle yanked him off. "Go!" she hissed, pushing Ranger ahead. The man struggled up, stumbled outside, and was lost in the darkness. Janice screamed from the main room. Michelle and Ranger sprinted back to find another intruder smashing open the evidence box. Janice tried to fight, but the man shoved her aside, grabbing a fistful of USB drives. Michelle fired a warning shot. The man froze, then dove for the window. Glass exploded as he tumbled through. Ranger barked, clawing at the sill, but the man disappeared into the night. Owen dragged a second attacker out of the pantry, cuffing him with his own handcuffs. "One down," he gasped, bleeding from a cut on his arm. "2 or 3 more outside, maybe." The radio crackled. Static, then Luis's frantic voice. "I'm at the edge of the woods, blocked at the road. They've got spotters. Sending location." Michelle checked her phone. Luis's GPS pinged just 100 yards from the safe house. She looked at Sarah. "We have to get him in, or he's dead." Sarah nodded, eyes wide but steady. "Let's go." They moved fast, Ranger leading the way through the back door and into the trees. Gunfire cracked in the distance, shouts, footsteps, the sound of a car tearing away. Michelle spotted Luis behind a fallen log, ducking gunfire, clutching a laptop case to his chest. "Over here," she hissed, waving him in, so Ranger sprinted to Luis, circling him and growling at the shadows. Together, they half-dragged Luis back through the brush, branches clawing at their arms. Owen and Janice held the door open as they tumbled inside, slamming it behind them. Ranger stood guard at the window, barking at every flash of movement. Michelle locked eyes with Sarah. "We can't stay. They know where we are. We have to get this evidence out now, or it's gone forever." Owen shook his head. "Road's blocked. They're watching every route." Luis, breathing hard, pulled a burner phone from his pocket. "My cousin's a deputy in the next county, outside their network. I can get her to send backup, but we have to hold out until she gets here." They settled in for a siege. The next hour felt like days. Men outside, circling, testing windows, shining flashlights. Ranger barked at every sound, never leaving Michelle's side. Sarah and Janice covered the doors, adrenaline keeping their hands steady. Owen sat by the stairs, bleeding but alert, shotgun ready. At last, the distant wail of sirens rose over the wind. Spotlights danced through the trees. Tires screeched, men shouted and ran. Michelle flung the door open as deputies poured in, rifles raised. In minutes, several attackers were cuffed and hauled away. The evidence, still mostly intact, was turned over to the deputies, who called in state investigators. When the chaos finally faded, Michelle, Sarah, and their battered team sat together on the floor, shaking with relief and exhaustion. Ranger collapsed at Michelle's feet, finally letting himself rest. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside was just beginning to clear. For now, at least, they had survived. The truth had made it through the fire, and so had they. Morning sunlight crept through the safe house's battered windows, illuminating a living room that looked like a war zone. The deputies from the next county had done their job. Crime scene tape fluttered on the porch, and the attackers were already in custody. But the fight was far from over. If anything, it was about to get bigger, riskier, and more public than ever before. Michelle Carter sat at the scarred dining table, bandaging Owen's arm while Sarah brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to keep everyone awake for days. Janice and Luis huddled together on the sofa, poring over what remained of the evidence: photos, flash drives, encrypted documents, and the critical manila envelopes that had survived the assault. Michelle glanced at the kitchen clock, its second hand jerking unevenly, and took a shaky breath. "They'll try to cover this up," she said, voice flat. "They'll spin it like we staged everything or stole evidence. We need the world to see what really happened." Sarah nodded, sliding a mug toward Michelle. "We have to get ahead of them. If the story is everywhere, they can't make it disappear." Luis straightened, determination etched in every line of his face. "I know someone. My cousin Natalie. She's a reporter for Channel 5. If anyone can get the truth out, it's her. But we have to move fast." Janice added, "We should duplicate everything. Multiple copies, multiple locations. If we lose one, we're still safe." Within the hour, they were working with military precision. Janice created backups on encrypted drives. Sarah and Owen took photos of every document, sending them to trusted contacts outside the city. Luis texted Natalie, his message simple: "Big story. Corruption, cover-up, police. Need your help. Safe house location. Encrypted link to follow." Natalie responded almost instantly. "Send proof first. If it checks out, I'm in." By mid-morning, a plan was in motion. Natalie arrived in an unmarked sedan, eyes sharp and not the least bit surprised to see a German shepherd greet her at the door, tail stiff and wary. She stepped inside, recorder already in hand. "I'm not here to make you look good," she warned. "Just to tell the truth." Michelle respected that. She slid the first stack of evidence across the table. "We're counting on it." Natalie worked quickly, asking questions, snapping photos, checking facts with the thoroughness of someone who knew just how easily stories got twisted. She listened to the audio files, Harding's orders, the threats, the bribe negotiations. She read through the bank records and the emails, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "You know this is going to explode," Natalie said quietly, eyes never leaving Michelle's. "You're going to be a target. All of you." Sarah squeezed Michelle's shoulder, voice unsteady but strong. "We already are." That afternoon, Natalie left with everything she needed. By 6 o'clock, Channel 5's evening broadcast led with the story. Major corruption uncovered in city police department. Whistleblowers attacked. Evidence stolen. Officers implicated. The video package was damning, Natalie's team had blurred faces and changed names where necessary, but Harding's voice rang out clear, ordering evidence to be planted and files to be destroyed. The broadcast flashed across every TV in the city, then spread online. Within hours, #Carter Case and #Justice for Ranger were trending on social media. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Viewers flooded the city's tip lines with new information: officers who'd been bullied into silence, clerks who'd witnessed bribes, even a judge who called the newsroom to confess what he'd seen. As the scandal spread, politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Harding and the councilmen were arrested by state authorities, their mugshots plastered across the web. The police chief, an old friend of Harding's, resigned in disgrace before sunrise. Michelle watched the chaos unfold from the safe house, a strange mix of relief and dread swirling in her stomach. "We did it," Janice whispered, tears in her eyes. "We finally got the truth out." But victory felt complicated. Michelle was still under review. She and Ranger had been separated for the duration of the legal process. He was safe, kept in quarantine by animal control. Standard protocol, they said, after an attack, even if it was in defense. Every time Michelle asked to see him, she was told, "Not yet." The separation gnawed at her more than anything else. Late that night, Michelle sat alone on the back porch, the noise of the news coverage drifting through the open door. Sarah joined her, silent at first, then said softly, "We wouldn't have made it without you. Or Ranger." Michelle shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I was just trying to clear my name." Sarah smiled, the first real smile in days. Sometimes heroes are just people who refuse to let go, even when everyone tells them it's over. Michelle closed her eyes, thinking of Ranger, his steady gaze, his unwavering loyalty, the way he'd fought for her when no one else would. The city was waking up to the truth, but all Michelle wanted was to see her partner again, to scratch his ears and promise him the fight had been worth it. In the days that followed, the case took on a life of its own. Other departments called for audits. The mayor announced an independent investigation into all city contracts. Whistleblower protections were fast-tracked. Through it all, Michelle gave statement after statement, her voice steady, her story never changing. Sometimes when the reporters left and the lawyers stopped calling, she felt the weight of it all, the fear, the anger, the cost. But she also felt the support of strangers, and the silent promise that, someday soon, she'd be reunited with the one who'd never doubted her, not for a second. For now, the city's wounds were open for all to see, and the road to justice was long. But there was no going back. The secrets were out, and nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom was packed. News crews squeezed shoulder to shoulder with city officials, fellow officers, and a few ordinary citizens who'd come to see what real justice looked like. Michelle Carter sat at the defense table, her hands folded tightly together, her heart racing as the judge read the findings. It had been 2 weeks since Channel 5's broadcast detonated through the city. Every day since, the headlines had been filled with corruption, cover-ups, apologies, and arrests. State investigators and federal agents swept through City Hall and the police department like a cleansing fire. Captain Harding and the councilman were both in custody, facing a pile of charges that would take years to sort out. Even some of Harding's staunchest defenders had started to flip, cutting deals for lighter sentences, but none of that seemed real to Michelle until now. This was the hearing that mattered, the one that would decide her future. The judge, her eyes steady and voice clear, announced the conclusion. The court finds that Michelle Carter was the victim of a conspiracy within the department, targeted by those who sought to profit from corruption and silence dissent. The charges against her are vacated. Miss Carter, you are fully exonerated, with apologies from this court and the people of this city. Michelle closed her eyes, a wave of relief nearly knocking her breath away. The room erupted in applause, first tentative, then thunderous. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't care who saw. Sarah squeezed her arm, grinning through her own tears. Owen, Janice, and Luis, seated behind her, let out whoops of victory. The moment was sweet, but Michelle's mind was on Ranger. Even through the whirlwind of legal meetings, press conferences, and phone calls, she'd fought tirelessly to be reunited with her partner. The city had kept Ranger in quarantine pending review, citing protocol, but public outcry and a few well-placed legal threats from her new lawyer had finally forced their hand. Now, as Michelle stepped out of the courthouse, she was met by a sea of cameras and flashing lights. She barely noticed them. All she saw was the small fenced area off to the side, where an animal control officer waited with a familiar leash in her hand. Michelle walked slowly, heart in her throat. The gate swung open, and Ranger bounded forward, his deep brown eyes locked on her. For a split second, Michelle wondered if he'd changed, if the weeks apart had dulled their bond. But then Ranger howled, a sound halfway between a bark and a cry of joy, and launched himself into her arms, nearly knocking her off her feet. She dropped to her knees in the grass, clutching him close as the world melted away. Cameras clicked. Reporters called out her name, but Michelle only had eyes for Ranger. He licked her face, tail wagging so hard it was a blur, his whole body shaking with excitement. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. "I missed you too, we did it. We're okay now." The city saw it all. The disgraced officer, cleared of all charges, hugging the dog who'd risked everything for her. In that single image, years of doubt, pain, and struggle were washed away. When Michelle finally stood, Ranger by her side, she faced the reporters with a newfound calm. "I wasn't the only victim," she said, her voice steady. "There are good cops and bad ones. But what saved me was the courage of a few people who refused to stay silent, and the loyalty of a partner who never gave up, no matter what anyone said." Sarah joined her at the microphones, her promotion to detective made public that morning. "We have a lot of work to do," Sarah told the crowd. "But the city is safer when we hold each other accountable." The mayor, eager for redemption, announced Michelle's appointment as the new head of the city's independent police oversight division. It was a job nobody wanted until now, but Michelle accepted, knowing her experience and her scars would help her make real change. Inside, Michelle's story went viral. People across the country shared her speech, reposted the image of her reunion with Ranger, and cheered as justice finally prevailed. The K-9 unit received a flood of donations. A local restaurant even started a Ranger Burger special to honor the hero dog. For Michelle, the whirlwind of attention was both dizzying and surreal. She found herself on talk shows and at press conferences, but the best moments were quieter. Morning jogs with Ranger in the park, late-night conversations with Sarah about everything they'd survived, and afternoons at the precinct, meeting the next generation of recruits who saw her as a role model. One afternoon, the department held a ceremony to honor everyone who'd helped bring the truth to light. Michelle stood on stage flanked by Sarah, Owen, Janice, Luis, and, of course, Ranger, who sat proudly at her side, wearing a new badge on his collar. As applause thundered, Michelle spoke from the heart. "We all want to believe that the system works, that justice wins. But sometimes it takes ordinary people fighting together to make it happen. I was saved by my friends, by the truth, and by a partner who trusted me when no one else would." If you ever find yourself alone, betrayed, or afraid, remember this: one loyal friend can make all the difference. The crowd stood in a standing ovation. For the first time in what felt like forever, Michelle felt at peace, not just vindicated, but truly free. That night, as the sun set over the city, Michelle and Ranger walked home together. She paused at the front steps, Ranger leaning against her leg, and looked back at the skyline. Different now, brighter, full of possibility. She scratched Ranger's head and smiled. "Ready for our next adventure, partner?" Ranger barked once, tail wagging, and together they stepped inside. Two survivors, finally home, ready to turn a hard-won redemption into something greater for everyone still searching for justice. The morning sun shimmered through the academy windows, casting golden patterns on the polished wood floor. Michelle Carter stood at the podium, her uniform crisp, her new badge glinting under the lights. But her gaze was soft, focused not on her accolades but on the rows of fresh faces before her. Recruits, dozens of them, men and women with notebooks open, nerves raw, eager to listen, not quite sure if they were meeting a legend or just another survivor. Michelle took a breath, steady and slow. She looked down at her notes, then set them aside. This story, she decided, needed no script. "Good morning," she began, voice clear, carrying to every corner of the auditorium. "I'm not here today as someone who's always done things right. I'm here as someone who knows what it means to lose almost everything and to fight for it back, piece by piece." The room fell silent, every eye on her. Even Ranger, who'd been allowed to sit beside the podium as a living symbol of the K-9 program, lay perfectly still, watching his partner with unwavering trust. Michelle's gaze swept the audience. "I want you to imagine something. One day, you're doing your job, protecting your city, believing in the people you work with. And then, out of nowhere, you're accused of a crime you didn't commit. The evidence is against you, your colleagues turn their backs, and the only friend you have left is a dog who can't even speak for you." A nervous ripple ran through the crowd, some shifting in their seats, others glancing at Ranger with new respect. That's where I found myself. The system I believed in was broken. I watched good people stay silent out of fear. I saw how a handful of powerful people could twist the truth for their own gain. It almost destroyed me. But that wasn't the end. She let the silence linger, then continued. "The real story is about what happened next. It's about the power of loyalty, the courage to speak up, and the importance of looking for the truth, even when it's hidden. Ranger never gave up on me, even when everyone else did. And it was Sarah Mitchell, Owen Tran, Janice Morrow, and Luis Cortez, each of them risking their own careers, who stood by me when I needed it most." She paused, emotion roughening her voice, but she pressed on, her eyes shining with conviction. "I want you all to understand something. Corruption doesn't start with a villain in a dark alley. It starts with little compromises, tiny silences, a willingness to look the other way. That's why it's so important to speak up, to trust your instincts, and sometimes to trust someone else's, even if that someone walks on 4 legs instead of 2. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, breaking the tension. Ranger's instincts found the truth. Sarah's integrity carried it forward. But it was all of us together that forced the city to face what it didn't want to see. Sometimes the truest evidence is invisible, until you're willing to see it differently, until you trust those who see differently. She shared details of the ordeal, how it felt to be isolated and betrayed, the late nights at the safe house, the terror and the hope, the moment when the public finally saw what was happening. She spoke not just of victory, but of trauma, how even now she woke at night sometimes, heart pounding, waiting for another blow that never came. "But I don't regret any of it," Michelle said, voice clear, strong. "Because from that fire, something better was forged. The city changed. The department changed. We wrote new whistleblower protocols. We launched a whole new set of training for K-9 officers, not just in detection, but in trust and communication. We made space for people to come forward, to protect each other, to make sure no one ever goes through what I did, what any of us did, again." She glanced at Ranger, who thumped his tail on the floor, as if in agreement. "Sarah and I now work with a national police reform group. We use our story as a training model, not to make people afraid, but to show them what's possible when you don't give up. We've spoken at other departments, at universities, even at city councils, and every time I walk into a room, I remember that feeling of being alone, until someone else chose to stand beside me." She let her words settle, watching the impact across the faces in the room, some thoughtful, some stricken, others inspired. Being an officer isn't just about making arrests or writing tickets. It's about protecting the innocent, yes, but also about protecting the truth. Sometimes the truth is inconvenient. Sometimes the cost feels too high. But if you let fear win, if you let silence win, then the whole system falls. A hand shot up in the front row, a young woman, bright-eyed and earnest. "How did you keep hope alive? When you felt totally alone, how did you not give up?" Michelle smiled, the lines around her eyes softening. "Hope isn't something you feel all the time. Most days, I was terrified. But every day, Ranger looked at me like I was still worth saving. My friends risked everything for me, and when the world turned its back, I learned to believe in myself, even when it was hard." She ended with a simple truth. Justice isn't a destination. It's a journey. It's built on loyalty, courage, and the willingness to fight for what's right, even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. The audience rose in a standing ovation, some wiping tears, others just applauding, the lesson sinking in. After the speech, recruits gathered around, asking questions, petting Ranger, eager to learn. Michelle felt the old sense of purpose return, stronger than ever. She wasn't just teaching, she was building a legacy. Outside, Sarah waited with a smile, holding coffee for both of them. "You killed it," she said. Michelle grinned. "We did, and we'll keep doing it. One class, one case, one story at a time." As they left, Ranger trotted ahead, tail wagging, leading the way. Proof that sometimes the best guide to the truth is the one who never lets you down. Months passed, and the city began to find its balance again, like a ship righting itself after a punishing storm. The police department had changed, slowly at first, then all at once. New faces appeared at morning roll call. Old wounds started to heal, and every meeting now opened with an affirmation. We do what's right, even when it's hard. Michelle Carter, once the department's black sheep, was now its leading voice for integrity. As head of the Independent Oversight Division, Michelle's days were packed. She worked with rookie officers, listened to citizens' complaints, and sat through late-night meetings with city leaders who, not so long ago, had doubted her. Sometimes the work felt endless, like bailing water with a cup. But she kept going, remembering not just what she'd lost, but what she'd gained. She met with community groups that once protested outside the precinct's doors. She shook hands with families who'd watched her story on the news, who told her that Ranger had inspired their own kids. She answered letters from other whistleblowers, now emboldened to come forward, and always reminded them, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone willing to listen. Ranger, for his part, became a local legend. He retired from active duty but was honored at every department event. his image painted on a mural outside the precinct, and even featured on the cover of the city's new K-9 unit calendar. Kids vied for the chance to walk him at community events, and his calm, loyal presence made even the toughest officers smile. One Saturday, the city threw its first ever K-9 festival, complete with food trucks, obstacle courses, and a stage for music and speeches. Michelle arrived early, walking Ranger down Main Street as neighbors cheered and waved. A group of school children darted over, hugging Ranger, who basked in the attention like a superstar. Michelle paused at a photo booth where a young mother lifted her daughter onto Ranger's back, carefully, of course, for a picture. "He's famous now, you know," the mother said with a wink. "Your story gives us hope that even when things get bad, they can get better." Michelle smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." Later, she took the stage as the festival's keynote speaker, Ranger sitting beside her, tail thumping in the afternoon sun. She looked over the crowd, families, officers, city officials, and people who'd once doubted her. She thought of the journey: betrayal, fear, survival, and finally, vindication. Every scar, every sleepless night now felt like a brick in the new foundation she was helping to build. Her speech was simple, but the words came from her heart. "I've seen justice fail. I've seen it rise again. We can't promise perfection, but we can promise to keep fighting, keep listening, and keep believing that loyalty and truth matter. This city isn't perfect, but together, we're building something better. Justice isn't just a courtroom or a badge. It's every choice we make every day when no one else is watching." The crowd erupted in applause, Ranger barked, and laughter rippled through the plaza. As the music started and children ran to try the K-9 obstacle course, Michelle mingled with old friends and new faces. Sarah, promoted again and now in charge of officer training, joined her at a food truck, the two women trading stories and good-natured jokes. Janice and Owen showed up with their families, and Luis snapped candid photos for the department's newsletter. Michelle's favorite moment came when a group of young cadets, fresh from the academy, faces alight with purpose, approached her with questions. "How do you stay strong when things get hard?" one asked. "What do you do when you feel like giving up?" She knelt so she was eye level with them. "You lean on your friends. You remember why you started, and you trust that if you keep doing the right thing, even when it costs you, good people will stand by your side. Just like Ranger did for me." Later, as dusk settled and the lights twinkled across the plaza, Michelle took a quiet walk with Ranger, weaving through the festival crowds. The air was warm with the scent of popcorn and barbecue, and everywhere she turned, she saw the results of her team's courage. A department no longer ruled by fear, a city daring to hope again. They reached a small park at the edge of the square where Michelle paused on a bench, Ranger curling up beside her. She listened to the distant music, the laughter of children, the comfortable buzz of a city at peace. For a moment, she let herself remember everything: the courtroom terror, the sting of betrayal, the nights in hiding, the fear that had almost broken her. But then she looked at Ranger, at his unwavering eyes and the way his tail swept the grass, and she felt only gratitude. A reporter spotted her and called out, "Michelle, any last words for the city tonight?" She thought for a moment, then stood, drawing Ranger to her side. "Justice is a journey, not a destination. It's built on loyalty, courage, and never letting go of what's right, even when the world turns against you. If you trust your instincts, hold on to your friends, and keep fighting for the truth, you'll find your way home." That's what Ranger and I did. And that's what I wish for every one of you. Applause followed her words across the twilight. Michelle and Ranger walked back toward the festival, surrounded by new friends, old colleagues, and a city forever changed. As the music swelled and lights flickered on, Michelle felt the story come full circle, a story of betrayal, loyalty, and redemption. And as she looked down at Ranger, she knew one truth would always hold. Trust, integrity, and partnership can outlast any betrayal. Together, they had not just survived, they had built something worth believing in. And somewhere in the laughter and lights, a new chapter began.